Hello, everybody. We are going to officially start in about 1 minute. So in about 1 minute, we're going to begin. Feel free to begin by saying hello to Dr. Craig in the chat, and then we'll do our formal introductions in 1 minute. So welcome, everybody, and feel free to say hello in the chat. Okay, so with this, I want to start off by saying thank you, everybody, for another great day of the Future Focus Educator Summit. I'm Andrew Hickman. I'm Director of Educational Technology at a Capital Region ESD in Olympia, Washington, and we are very honored that you are with us today. I want to do a couple housekeeping things. If you're looking for the schedule of sessions to come after this keynote, just remember, click Summit Information and scroll down. It's at the bottom of the page, and you'll see all the upcoming sessions. The other thing is don't forget to check out the Participant Experience website, and you can do that by picking Program Activities and the Clock Hours button, where you're also going to find clock hour information there. And once you're there, you can see contests and other activities that are happening. This evening, we are having a sip and paint night. To feel free to join us this evening. So with that brief announcement, once again, thank you for all being here. Very excited for this session. I have the privilege of now introducing Dr. Anthony Craig. He is a professor of practice and director of leadership for learning at the University of Washington. And he is going to honor us with his keynote, Shaping Futures in the Here and Now, Dreams Require Action. So please welcome Dr. Anthony Craig with me, and we're very excited for this keynote. So, Dr. Craig?
Waklanu Shamash, Sheikh Patway, Inknash Winiksha, Naku Sapsi Kwakla. Thank you, Andrew. Good day. My name's Naku Sapsi Kwakla. Ku Shiapu Tumtki Anthony Craig, Washnash Yakama Nation Kanik, Ku Nishaikha Tolelatpa. My English name is Anthony Craig. I'm from the Yakama Nation, and now I stay at Tulalip. Kut Kutenchash, University of Washington Pa, Washnash Sapsikwachla. I work at the University of Washington, and I am a teacher there. I don't know if my language has a word for professor, so I stick with teacher very proudly. I am going to click over to share some slides, and I've been thinking about this opportunity for some time. And let's see. And I started to think about ways to really leverage this time with you all in 55 minutes to imagine what's possible for our region. And I often will say these territories. So I start in the Ichishkin language because I think that it matters to seek justice and return to old ways as a true and vital form of tribal sovereignty and the goodness that tribal sovereignty can bring all people in these territories. I often challenge myself and others to answer the question, am I bringing justice to these territories? Or how am I bringing justice to these territories? So today's time together will hopefully begin to answer that question for you or us. Would someone in the chat tell me that whether or not we're looking good in terms of the sharing? I don't know this platform well yet. All right, thank you, Catherine. Let's see. If I knew how to advance the slide, we'd be good to go.
You just have to click on it.
Thanks, Andrew. I also want to start with something that over the past few months and years has sort of justice. And while I'm not solely offering a critique of land acknowledgements, I am offering a small critique of land acknowledgements. I think that there are places that we can value the acknowledgement of peoples and lands and waters. And I think that there are also places that we can go much deeper. So I mentioned to you Nishaikha Tulalip. I come to you from Tulalip. Tulalip is the contemporary and ancestral homeland of the Stahobsh people, now known as the Tulalip tribes of Washington. These are two scenes from Tulalip tribes. My grandson is a Tulalip tribal member, and part of my responsibility in understanding the lands and waters, both as a grandfather but also as an educator, is to always hold past, present, and most importantly, futures of Indigenous peoples like my grandson, in recognizing that I'm a visitor here. I'm from the Yakama Nation, and just the way I want visitors and those living amongst the Yakama peoples to understand our forever relationship with lands and waters, I do the same here in Tulalip. I saw several of you already begin to enter in the chat where you were. I would also encourage you to recognize in writing the homelands, the peoples of those homelands that you occupy now, or if you're a Native person yourself on your homelands and your territories, let's acknowledge that. Part of this is a public commitment to be in relationship with Indigenous peoples, Indigenous histories, and again, Indigenous futures. So you're looking at two images, one of my grandson and me at Mission Beach in Tulalip, and the other just Mission Beach on its own. I suppose you can imagine how the English name for this place came to be. And part of the story work that we'll do today involves missions as institutions and educators and leaders who worked at missions amongst our tribal communities. And also, I like that picture of me and my grandson, so I like to put it on slides. It's really hard to not see people, by the way. Part of what I'm up to is always working to please my elders. This is a Tulalip elder, Tiatmas Raymond Moses, Atwai Raymond Moses. He's gone on now to the other side. I really dream of this moment that the old timers are looking down at me and us, and they realize that we've liberated them and that we've created new and more beautiful futures, even though we have places in our communities that continue to be colonized, continue to hold histories and contemporary realities of violence and erasure, but that the old ones can look down and hear me speaking Ichishkin, hear my family speaking Lashutsi, the little bit that we can, and just say yes. Like this is, you'll hear me talking about seeking or finding life later today. This is a version of finding life for me offered by Tiatmas, that the old timers can look down and see that we're circling back to fullness and the beauty our people were made to have. So what is this title? There's a lot here that I continue to aspire to. I'm not the most expert shaper of futures, but I believe in shaping futures. We can't get it all done in the here and now, but there's plenty we can be doing in the here and now. So to hold these ideas at the same time, that what we believe about, what we believe is possible for the future starts now and indeed started before we were even here. So the connection between history, present, and future is what I want us to be thinking about and reflecting on today, and really not to be passive in the work of shaping futures. We have communities that we love, where we live, where we work, the people we think about when we're falling asleep at night. Maybe it was a good day, maybe it was a rough day. All of this is future shaping work. the different questions that you ask. I'm really working to indigenize my approaches to education, so you won't hear me talk a ton about the sorts of data that we're used to without at least offering a question of critique. But really, the shaping futures idea is about beauty and power and completeness in these spaces with the actual humans you're serving. So that can be your colleagues. So I want you to call to mind your colleagues, your students, their families, those yet to come, those who have gone on. And really today and moving forward, keep reminding yourself that the actions you take in the here and now are shaping futures. And those can be more just and beautiful futures, or they can be actions that maintain the status quo. So that's a challenge to each of us to really hold that. So what futures am I shaping, and how am I doing that? Bertha Dan, Atwai Bertha Dan, she's also gone now, reminds us that we all have to dream. So I've been exploring in my own work and offering to you all today some notions of dreaming. And these are sometimes asleep dreams, but most often I'm talking about those awake dreams. What would it be like if we, and then fill in the blank? What are our students capable of if we only, what are our students already doing if we stop doing X, Y, and Z? These dreams really inspire me, and it's usually the dreams of others in informal conversations that I hear from my graduate students at the University of Washington, my community here in Tulalip, family of educators back on my reservation in Yakima, people who are really exploring what's possible and really asking these questions about audacious futures and never being just a rock. So rocks also have power, but they're not very active in the here and now. Their purpose is more about over time. If I could really examine this quote from Bertha Dan, an elder from Swinomish, just north of here in Tulalip in Coast Salish territory. So I'm asking you to get really specific today about your dreams. And if your dreams involve state test scores, English language proficiency as the high point, then today you might want to dig a bit deeper. If your dreams hold labels like equity or justice without real clarity about what that means, what will that look like, how will you feel, then I'll ask you to go a bit deeper today. So I'm going to do a bit of story work. So story work, in the way I'm thinking about it right now, we all have versions of story, regardless of culture, both contemporary, traditional. And I've been really influenced in the last few years by the story work of Dr. Joanne Archibald, who is a professor in British Columbia, in Canada. And she really thinks about the ways ideas and energies and dreams and theories are transferred through stories, mostly traditional stories in her work. But I'm also really engaged in sort of the narratives of the here and now, and what my story and the stories of people around me mean in terms of defining and articulating and designing my work. I really want us to think about an idea I'm calling movement energies. So what makes you move? And once you move, where do those energies go and how are they transferred? So it's related to collective work. So we talk a lot about I and you today, but really it's about we and the community and the collective possibilities. And then agency and power. As someone who's been in like formalized education roles for over 20 years, I recognize that often agency is held as if it only belongs within a formal institutional space, when in fact the most powerful agency is almost exclusively in the community, whether it's with the youth or the elders, the knowledge keepers, the families. And I'm looking for that shared sense of agency in my work and invite you to do the same. And I really want us to think about where we might fall in this acting and leading, dreaming, story shaping cycle. So it just keeps going over and over. This is not a linear process. So often, imagine these boxes on the left, this conveyor belt approach to what's my story, move to the next box, and that might hold what's my dream, who's the community member I can put on this list to say that they have been involved in this work or they've given me a perspective. So really this notion of conveyor belt is here to hold this linear approach to the work, even what I'm talking about today, when I depict it at the bottom to say, yeah, we'll tell some story, and then we'll talk about some dreaming, and then we'll think about some actions. It doesn't really work like that, as we know. It's messy and complex in really good and powerful ways, just like an ecosystem. So the right is just a Google image, actually from the United Nations, a study on forests. And what I love about this image, maybe more than anything, is that it has cultural and spiritual values depicted above the mountains as part of the ecosystem. So I want you to all picture now, whether it's your central office or hopefully a neighborhood around a school that you know or a neighborhood that you know well, all of the different moving and interacting parts of an ecosystem. While you might be tending to something you call family engagement, there might be a curriculum adoption taking place. You might be hiring a new building leader or become a new building leader. The point is, none of this happens just in lockstep linear motion. We're all dreaming and working and moving, interacting with the community, the histories, the futures, new colleagues, old colleagues, policies, all at the same time. So I really am trying to rightfully complicate all of this for us rather than pretend, yeah, Anthony Craig showed up one day and said, just have a dream and then you're good. In no way am I suggesting that. This is really complex work, rightfully so, because it's the work that centers humanity above all. So these are images of my home. This is Yakima Nation. There are many ways to get to know the Yakima Nation. So I wonder and hope there are other Yakima people on this call. This is just one version of one story. I don't speak for all Yakima people. I don't have the quintessential Yakima experience as if there is one. I am from my reservation. I lived there my whole childhood before I moved to the University of Washington, and then ended up in Tulalip in my early 20s with my wife and our kids, who are all citizens of the Tulalip tribes. But there's beauty here. And I invite you to look at these historical and contemporary photos and just soak in like just the beauty that comes with this range of a community that often doesn't have its own voice heard in telling a story. So this is Yakima Nation. This is part of what makes me who I am and the way I shape my dreams. Some of these places no longer exist. The fishermen, that sacred place, that rich place of resources has been dried up by the government. At the bottom in the middle, we have our eldest elder, Tuchamshish, Dr. Virginia Beavert. She literally wrote the dictionary for our language, and in many ways continues to work at the University of Oregon on our language at 99 years old. On the left is my Sapsikwachla, my teacher of the language, Tualatin Gregory Sutterlicht. So this is someone who carries dreams and is teaching university courses. He's teaching community courses and holding a group of us Yakimas together in learning our Ichishkin language. And as you can see, he teaches preschool as well. So in this place, as one example, in our territories, our shared territories, are all of these dreams. Mount Adams, Pato, our most sacred site, was once taken from us by the government and then returned by act of Supreme Court and Congress. Our forest lands that we put a lot of time and energy, those movement energies into, and we need our young people to understand. So all of this as an example of complexities within a community if you search for expansive stories, expansive narratives of a place. White Swan High School, also Wapato Middle School, and Quilceda Tulalip Elementary, or Tulalip Elementary at the time when I was a student teacher and teacher there and principal. These are the places that have shaped me. And similarly to, I rely on Google because Google holds, the internet holds all of these stories for us. And in many ways, we have lost some discernment as a society in understanding the stories that are in front of us. When you Google Yakima or Yakima Nation, what comes up most frequently is missing and murdered Indigenous women and people, murders in White Swan, Washington from a couple years ago, and crime rates very often come up first in Google hits. That's not the narrative I want to tell, but that narrative exists. Very similarly, when you think about White Swan High School, Wapato Middle School, and the elementary schools in Tulalip, there are particular narratives that have existed over time and continue to persist about what these places, what the stories these places hold, and the stories these places tell if you don't take a critical perspective and also make sure you're talking to the right people. These are beautiful places that shaped me, and another scholar that I'll mention today, Dr. Michelle Jacob, in just a moment, that really help us understand that you can have a narrative about graduation rates that are quite low, about truancy and absenteeism, about discipline referrals, about college going success, teacher turnover. My point is, if you look at the data that we're so frequently handed or that we produce and then it's brought back to us about status of schools or school improvement, we're almost always, and I'll say in my case, always missing the narratives of the folks who live and work in that space. And we're definitely missing the dreams of those spaces. Now, one more bit of Anthony before I invite you to do some written reflection. We're at this moment in time when broader society can and must grapple with the legacy of Indian boarding schools and Indian residential schools. I'm very careful with this story. This is my grandmother at the bottom left. My grandmother raised me in my home with my parents, my 5 siblings. She knew my children. So to situate this in time, this is not long ago history. My grandmother's gone now, but the school on the right, the multi-story school, that's St. George's Indian School. It's in Tacoma, Washington. My grandma, along with her sisters and many other Yakima people and people from different tribal communities and reservations, were forcibly taken to that school. My grandma survived. The school on the top left is a building that went with the Fort Simcoe Indian School at Fort Simcoe outside White Swan, Washington, where my family is from. My great-grandmother survived that boarding school. These schools, while the buildings might be gone today, while the policies have been replaced by other policies, continue to impact our communities. When you see the news of newly uncovered, unmarked graves. Uh, it, I can't describe for you the feelings that it brings up, that these places called school, these places of assimilation, erasure, elimination of language, culture, ways of thinking. A colleague, Mohammed Khalifa, calls it epistemicide. So getting rid of all of your ways of knowing and being in the world, it's deeply impactful. So when you tell the stories, when some tell the stories of these places and really work to understand what happens in these places that continue to be indigenous, also multicultural, multiracial, but indigenous at their core because of the lands they're on, we must understand these stories. I'm working on putting together a group of resources that I'll get to Andrew, because I think as a region, we owe it to our students and our communities, our territories, past and future, to understand the legacy of boarding school harm. And I will continue to tell this story for my grandmother, but also for my grandson. I'm hoping that throughout today we can take some moments to pause, and Andrew helped me see how I could use the chat. But I really want you to pause and start to tell your July 28th version of the narrative of the place you're in. It could be your story, the story of somebody who's in your community that or family that helped shape your work. I want you to really grapple with the ecosystem approach of stories versus the conveyor belt. Like, what are the multiple stories you have to hold all at the same time as educators serving these communities? Who speaks back to the narratives? Who's telling the narratives? And do you have this sort of nagging feeling about any unheard stories? They're not untold, people are telling them, but as systems, we often get conditioned to not hear them or not have to hear them, or really to be afraid of hearing them because it'll complicate our work, rightfully. So you can be in the chat, you can be jotting notes that are private and just for you. You can be texting someone else who's on this call or a thought partner who you know. You can pick this up later, but I want you to get specific. Move beyond just copying down the question and really take a few moments. We're going to take about 3 minutes, and using the chat or your notes, really try to get into your story, the story of someone in your place. Here's a 30-second warning for you. Wrap up whatever sentence you're on. Okay. Now I'm back to my story for just a moment for a quick check-in to say there's no number of minutes that'll allow us to capture the necessary stories. However, I want to do something that a colleague of mine, Dr. Dana Nixon, calls troubling what you just wrote. Let's trouble this a bit. We are working in a settler colonial context that doesn't automatically prepare our young people to know these lands, to know these languages, to know the role of elders and young people just because they earn a diploma, just because they get good grades. That's not to say I don't value high school completion, successful academic effort and endeavors, but instead to say, is our dream expansive enough? When we offer a land and waters and people's acknowledgement, do we acknowledge that our systems are most frequently too constraining to do what it is the people that we're acknowledging need? So just to trouble a bit, as we keep getting back into the reflective stance and going back to your notes and to the stories, I'm really pushing us in these territories, and this is why I take invitations like this to work with my neighbors to expand our notions of what it means to be successful. Could our students do the necessary work of fighting for tribal sovereignty in American court system? Can our students operate with the appropriate scientific, spiritual, and social understandings of maintaining forest lands? Are our students engaged in reclaiming and using our indigenous languages of the tribes in our territories, at least 29 federally recognized tribes? And do our students understand that outside the school walls, and hopefully as frequently as possible inside, that there are elders who hold the necessary work? So this is not going to be a linear expression of what's possible and in our dreaming. Instead, it's going to be a complicated and complicating reality of dealing with the legacy of harm. Boarding schools is one approach, but in all of our communities, there are many approaches that our systems have taken over time: school, healthcare, citizenship, whatever it is, that have really tried to constrain who our societies allow our young people to be. So I'm really pushing us to trouble all these notions of what it means to be successful and make sure we're constantly expanding what's possible and then required of us. Another quote from Swinomish elder Atwai Faye Bates: "Healing is as much a part of life as hurting. It isn't our fault what happened to us historically. It is our responsibility now to help ourselves get well." So even given everything I just offered to you about the realities of settler colonialism yesterday, today, and tomorrow, we are also responsible for our healing and in participating in the healing for ourselves and for others. A couple scholars I want to highlight that continue to influence me. The first, from right here in our territories, now a professor at the University of Oregon, Dr. Michelle Jacob, another member of the Yakama Nation. She reminds us that it's inadequate and incomplete to just stop at understanding something like a soul wound that comes from boarding school, loss of land, loss of language, high death rates, tons of loss in these indigenous communities. That's inadequate. It won't get us movement and movement energies to our dreams. It also can't be ignored. But to really think about what it would take to heal our communities, and she's talking about Yakama Nation, but I propose we could be talking about any community. Any of us can and should say we're working on equity. And part of my contention today is to say equity has to involve healing, not improvement of test scores or some number alone, but whatever's driving that, we've taken a healing approach and are now leveraging the knowledges, expertise, and power in our communities to heal and to really create brighter futures. Another scholar, another indigenous person, Dr. Gregory Cajete from Pueblo tribe, he reminds us that the ultimate quest really is to find life, or to find a good life. And this beautiful and powerful place that indigenous people speak of, there are oftentimes, I'll get into audiences who are wondering, why do I reference indigenous so frequently when I'm talking to everybody? And I'll just let people know, when I'm talking about indigenous people, that's who I'm centering, but I'm not excluding anybody else. So part of my approach as a Yakama person in understanding my own life way, my own approach to leadership and to education and work, is that we move from a place that I can understand best, and maybe you can do the same, or maybe you're centering the cultures and peoples of your community, and really trying to find that beautiful life that comes from that center, rather than centering what our Western systems have been trying to achieve for so long, and maybe finding beautiful life, and maybe experiencing healing. But it's really us seeking the values of the people that we serve, personal, social, and spiritual values. So I'll pause there just to say, we get into the factory model of trying to put together improvement plans or strategic directions or policy and procedure when we're not automatically centering and personifying the values of the people we're serving. That can involve social, spiritual, and personal values in addition to academics, to intellectual values. So in doing this work, I lean on a couple scholars that help us imagine what's the relationship between what I'm trying to achieve and who I am right now. What's the relationship between what I'm trying to achieve and the history of the community I'm in and my own history? And what's the relationship between all of those realities over time? So I am in this very moment, both my grandmother and my grandson. I'm my grandmother's grandmother and my grandson's grandchildren. So to really think about what it means in this moment is a much bigger responsibility than 180 days or a 2-year budget cycle or a 3-year grant. All of this work has to weave together, braid together what has happened, what can happen with what I'm doing now. Annie Shimaru, it's not her idea, but it's something that she wrote about, is taking a proleptic politic or involving prolepsis. If you've heard me speak recently, I've been talking about the ideas on this slide for some time, really trying to unpack what this means in relationship with something that's much more expansive than the things we often produce in our Western systems, like improvement plans. But this idea of prolepsis requires us to be able to dream and develop leadership and educational practices all at the same time. It will also require us to gather data to understand, are we moving in the right direction? Are we stagnant? Are we going the wrong way? So this is the place where I say it's not that data is bad. It never is. Data is information that doesn't tell its own story. We have to understand what the data, whatever that might be, is telling us, um, interpret it, and then make a decision for how we'll move next. So there's some of those energies I was talking about before. Linda Smith, one of the preeminent Indigenous scholars from New Zealand, really thinks about imagination leading to action. So if I can imagine something, it means I have to develop those realities in the here and now. And Megan Bang, Ojibwe scholar, was one day just coaching me and telling me that you're really trying to cram everything into the frameworks that we already have, and they'll never work. You have to either expand or create new frameworks. And then Annie Shimaru chimed in the conversation to say, or lean back on frameworks that have existed in your communities for generations that we've just been conditioned to ignore. So time to reflect again. What is your dream or vision? What are the dreams in your community, and how did you get to know those dreams? What's next for you to interact with them and go deeper, understand them more deeply? How do those dreams reflect the ways you're leading? And I'm not talking to people just with some leadership aspect in their job title or job description. I'm talking to everybody. We are each leading. You're leading your own learning right now. How and why are you leading? So let's go back and take a few moments to engage with this reflection. And again, the chat or your own personal notes, all of that's good. So you have, again, about 3 minutes or so. Okay, 30-second warning. Somehow I lost my slide, so I'm going to refine that. I'm really working in my own practice to avoid existing just through negation, or hopefully I'm back, just through negation or just in response to settler colonialism. So I'm really pushing myself as a Yakima person and as a leader who's been at this for some time to accept the responsibility to get specific with both what I am trying to disrupt and intervene around, but also what I would replace it with. So Linda Smith offered a quote. I can't even find the post or the paper or the chapter where she said it. But essentially, if we're constantly just trying to decolonize, which is to fight the settler reality or the unjust or inequitable systems, and we're not also doing the work for whatever that day one where we get to do what we know is right, then we're not really decolonizing. We're not really getting ready. So just know that you're experiencing Anthony Craig in real time saying, I know the things that upset me. I know the things that are harmful. I know the things that were done to my grandmother, to people my age, that continue to happen to many, many communities, not just Indigenous. But am I specific enough with what it'll feel and look like when we get to this other place, what Leanne Simpson calls the otherwise? Well, otherwise, what would we be living? So it leads me to these spaces of collective dreaming, because I want to know that our movement energies, like what we put into the world, what we go back and do, in the moment decision, is leading to something more beautiful. So just to give you a sense for what we're up to. And part of my own personal actual anxiety involves perfection. And it can freeze me up in such a way where I have a million questions and I feel like I have zero answers. And I come back to this quote from Bertha Dan from Swinomish, because it reminds me that my best right now is acceptable. My best right now is good. It's moving us, it's recognized as what can move us forward, and we can only get better from there. So just to say that part of our battle with sort of settler logics around perfection or evaluation can be combated with Indigenous knowledges that say, actually, doing something is what you're being asked to do, not doing the perfectly right thing in the moment. So with that spirit, I want to offer an example. So as a Yakima living at Tulalip, I also didn't know some of the complex and intricate realities of this Coast Salish community. So just briefly to say, I am a citizen of Yakima Nation. That's where I grew up. My dad, who's in the background of this picture, is non-native. His people came from Ireland. He was born and raised on my reservation, taught there for 30 some years. None of that makes him a Yakima person. So I am both Yakima and Irish. My mom is also Suquamish and Puyallup. So I have some Coast Salish lineage, but my culture is very much from White Swan and Wapato, where I grew up. That doesn't automatically transfer to a community like Tulalip. So I was doing my own work as a student teacher and principal and central office administrator to really begin to develop practices around knowing a community, not in an extractive, piecemeal, static list sort of way, but in a traditional, ancestral, Indigenous, how can I be of these people? How can I be welcomed in such a way that I get to know the knowledges that are here? And how can I get the permission and the trust to then bring that back into this formalized system that, if you think about those images of the boarding school, is still that to a great number of Native people. We are still holding those images of where our grandparents and parents and great-grandparents were taken and held against their own will. They had no decision-making there. And it's one of the main reasons that decision-making for our young people in schools now is so important to us as Native people. So anyway, I started to try to get to know what's in Tulalip that is not in the schools in Tulalip, and what can I do about that? So I started by engaging a group of younger elders who had expressed to me several times that they were very interested in this formalized school improvement process that we were in. So I was the instructional coach at the time and soon became the principal. And we had been in these cycles of improvement or transformation for several years, or several cycles as defined by Department of Ed or OSPI, and little was changing in terms of test scores, but a lot was changing in terms of the energies in the school, the involvement of families, the happiness of children, the knowledges that were being expressed in this space. And all of that is because the community told us what they wanted and we listened. The community described what it could be like and we tried it. So all of this is to say this work is possible, is happening in lots of places, not just Tulalip. I know of it in Welpinit. I know of it in White Swan. There are lots of places this work is, some version of this work is happening when we actually hear the community, when we actually privilege these cultural knowledges that are being handed to us by elders. So examples from Tulalip, and I invite you to just sort of transfer this to your own community, is to know that culture is alive. You can't pick up a book, even if it's a wonderful book like Yakima Rising by Michelle Jacob, and then know everything you need to know about a community. You have to be present and you have to be open and you have to allow this to be in a time that's very different than Western time. It's not go to an event or a ceremony or a community gathering and then check it off your list. There's really this ecosystem approach of the many places that you might be where learning is happening for you. So not learning just for other people, but where you are learning and absorbing and making sense. There isn't just one Tulalip approach or Yakima approach or fill in the blank. There are many, many ways that the daily lives of our young people and their families are playing out. So these are not static lists. And it might seem as though this is all very straightforward and why would Anthony even have this on a slide? But I just want us to, again, pause and think about the Western logics that we often use that get boiled down to a typed piece of paper or something that can be uploaded to a website. Click here to learn more about our cultural competency PD or whatever it is. This is work that's complex and ever changing, and it has to be in relationship with the community that we are serving. So final reflection, and then I want to open to questions. So Andrew has offered to read off questions from the chat. I think I can see the chat too, but I really want you to think about, how do you know your community? And why do you think you know it? Who are the knowledge keepers? And by the way, maybe you are them. I'm not speaking to a completely separate audience from the folks who are actually of and from the communities we're serving, by the way. So don't be shy about saying what it is you bring if this is the home community you serve. And in what ways are young people teaching you, or do you think they're trying to teach you? So let's take just a couple minutes to think about that reflection. And given the very short time, if there are one or two questions that end up in the chat, that can happen right now too. And then I'll make sure Andrew cuts me off when it's time. All right, my friends. I am known in my teaching for having way too many questions. My students call it question stacking. So I have another stack of questions for you, but I really want you to take these away and know that this one transaction, this one interaction, this one 56 minutes in time doesn't fix anybody, me or you or our communities. But I also want us to recognize the relationship between this 56 minutes or this 1 minute I'm in right now and the futures that I'm working to make more possible. The decisions I make, the dreams I dream, the courage that it takes to act, the relationships that I build, the questions for my own learning that I need to take out into the world are all related in this moment and to the past and to the future. Am I living a life that would make my ancestors look down and say, yes, he's doing it? Am I living a life that the ancestors look down and say, okay, I see what he's doing? And am I living a life for my grandson, his name's Kona, where Kona's grandkids can look back and say, yeah, that's what grandpa's grandpa was doing at that time. That's what he did. He asked this question. He formed that idea. And just to say that our dreams can't just be dreams if we continue to let anybody, any system, any process move like a conveyor belt so we can stuff our dreams into those boxes. Instead, we get to enrich and experience and live in an ecosystem that's complex and ever expansive. Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions there. I'm going to invite Andrew back in, and thank you, the organizers, for the opportunity. Thank you to the audience for your engagement. And thank you for letting me show up as myself, as someone grappling with these very same ideas that I'm presenting to you today.
Well, and we just want to make sure that we send a huge thanks to you for sharing your wisdom and your story and the dreams. And we're just so appreciative that you took the time to be with us. And thank you for everything that you shared. So I invite all to say thank you in the chat. We really appreciate your keynote. I've been reading the comments, and you can tell how inspired that you've made them as well, and how we're all thinking about things moving forward. So thank you, Dr. Craig, for your wisdom. Okay, everybody. The next sessions are starting in about 2 minutes. So feel free to go back to the main lobby, the summit information, find a session you want to attend to, and please enjoy the Future Focus Educator Summit today. And once again, thank you, Dr. Craig.